You are listening to The Signal on Friday, November the 21st. I'm Adam Walsh. Today on the show, we are wrapping up Climate Week. It's day 5, folks. Today, for the final day of Climate Week, food, nutrition, our health, and how climate change is impacting them, plus some solutions and a look forward. So we started the week, and we post all the shows, right? So they're on YouTube. They're also on the CBC Listen app for The Signal. So if there's anything you missed, if you're curious about Climate Week, you can go back and listen to them. We started the week speaking with CBC international climate producer Jill English, who was reporting from COP30, the UN Climate Summit in Belém, Brazil. The latest headline from that, as COP30 wraps up and as we wrap up Climate Week here, it says, fossil fuel phase-out plan dropped from draft UN climate deal. 30 countries refuse deal without commitment to develop a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels. That is on cbc.ca News Climate for today. It goes on to say... here's the lead, right? The COP30 Climate Summit was headed for a showdown Friday over the future of fossil fuels after host Brazil dropped efforts to develop a global plan to shift away from oil, gas, and coal in the proposed deal. A draft text for a deal for this year's UN Climate Summit released before dawn on Friday contained no reference to fossil fuels, dropping entirely a range of options on the subject that had been included in an earlier version. The issue has been one of the most contentious at the 2-week conference of nearly 200 governments in Brazil's Amazon city of Belém. Do check that out if you want to know more on for CBC. Another thing came up this week. We've been talking about, the oil industry. We've been talking about climate change. We spoke about a just transition, right? Transitioning to a low carbon economy. A couple of folks mentioned Premier Tony Wakeham's earlier comments on the campaign trail about wildfires and climate change. I did speak with the Premier about this a couple weeks ago. I spoke with him for the This is Newfoundland and Labrador podcast, our new CBC NL news podcast. So if you like a news story once a week in your podcast feed, please give it a follow. But here is a clip of my interview with the Premier. During the campaign, you made a comment about the oil and gas industry and the summer of devastating wildfires, just saying, you don't think the two are related. Now, the burning of fossil fuels does cause global warming. I'm just wondering if you've had any more thoughts on this or just how your party plans to tackle climate change and adaptation and where things need to go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think what's important for us is every time we speak about those devastation caused by those wildfires, understanding exactly what my comments were being made there was what actually caused those fires, in particular, what started them. That was the issue that we still don't know for sure. But in terms of climate change itself, clearly our province is being significantly impacted by climate change. We've seen it in the intensity of the storms, whether it's a storm surge off the ocean or whether it's significant rainfalls or hurricanes. So we have to have an action plan in place as a province to be prepared for that. So it's instead of just simply reacting every time we have all this significant damage, we have to find a way to start looking at preventive measures because it's coming. The storms are more intense. We have to have that preparation. Wildfires if they happen more frequently, what do we do? And there's lots of suggestions that have been made about some of the things, and we need to look at that, whether it's wildfires, whether it's storm surges. How do we protect the infrastructure that we have? That's what's key on one side. On the other side, when I think about global warming and where we are, and as a province, when we think about the fact that 98% of our energy comes from renewable sources, here in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, I would argue that we've pulled above our weight as a province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Think about it, the fact of how much money we spent on Muskrat Falls, and I know the cost is significant, but we bore that cost. We're bearing that cost. The federal government simply gave us loan guarantees. They didn't take an equity position in it. And yet we've got 98% of our province on renewable energy sources, and we're also helping Nova Scotia come off coal. So that's the thing that I think people forget. But here in this province, we continue to work on that and continue to look forward to making changes. But when I talk about our oil industry, the world still has a demand for oil. And we know that if that demand goes away, those companies are going away. So the whole argument is our oil, yes, it's not carbon free, and we all know that, but it has been suggested by many that it does have less of a carbon footprint than some of the other oil that's being extracted.
For the manufacturing, oil is oil, but like
Right.
the manufacturing end is less carbon intensive, but a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that as long as that demand is there, we should be able to provide the world with this oil. And so that's why I'm adamant that our oil industry, we need to support it, and we need to keep increasing it, and we need to be open for business.
A couple of weeks ago, my conversation with Premier Tony Wakeham there. So if you're wondering about, if you hadn't heard the Premier's stance on climate change and oil and gas, that's what it is. Let's go now. So, folks, I'm Adam Walsh. This is The Signal. It is Climate Week, Day 5. We've got Joe Bowden on the line, an entomologist in Corner Brook. How you doing?
Good, Adam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, look, thanks for coming on. Colleague Lindsay Bird sent me a note about you because she was like, "Hey, you're doing Climate Week. You should talk to Joe." And I thought when I looked at the email the ability to have a conversation around how this warming planet of ours is pushing species northward. In this case, ticks.
Right.
I was hooked. Obviously interested. Tell us about your research.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm an entomologist with Natural Resources Canada, and so I work on understanding insects and other terrestrial arthropods out there on the landscape. So by that I mean like spiders and ticks and the like. And so we were, as you mentioned, one of the sort of impacts that we've heard many impacts this week and over the last number of years, of course, of different ways that climate change is impacting our lives, but also species out there that we interact with and things like that. One of the most significant examples is, of course, that climate change is really redistributing things across the landscape and around the world. So we think about like just invasive alien species getting introduced from like import, export, stuff like that, or people's travel. Warmer climates and more northern environments might be more suitable under climate change, of course, to the introduction or establishment of species in the north, and particularly in areas like here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And another way is that just through northward movement. So if we think about, we know that particularly in the north, warming is occurring significantly faster than in areas like the tropical areas. So we hear about, of course, more warmer temperatures at boreal and Arctic zones. And so we were able to, thanks to community scientists or community science data platforms, specifically iNaturalist or an eTick, and thanks to listeners out there that do use those kinds of platforms to interact with, because they provide not only instant feedback for you when you take images of things like ticks or plants or animals out there. They provide pretty instant feedback on a species ID, but also it provides data for folks like myself as scientists to use those data and model, in this case, current and future projections of distribution of species that could be of public health concern, for example. So what we're able to do is use those online databases with thousands of records across Eastern Canada and the United States. So we were able to take those data and basically relate them to current climate conditions. So we were able to model and understand which key environmental predictors are explaining tick distributions in Canada and Eastern United States. And then we were able to identify those environmental predictors, those climates. And we identified things like net primary productivity. So if you think about the amount of greenness or amount of plant biomass out there on the landscape, and things like, so we think about things like more southern climates, like temperate areas or tropical areas that are more green, than more than like boreal or Arctic zones, for example. And then we things like mean annual temperature and growing season length, which we know is getting longer as well. And we're able to use those and forecast them under future climates. So thanks to those climate researchers out there that have provided us important modeling data on future climates, so we're able to take those and try to understand under future climates, where are we likely to see ticks in the future?
Right. So
ticks are one of these really. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, and because it's like I remember, gosh, like we're talking about maybe 10 years ago more when I was like a reporter here, did a story about that we're looking into. People were wondering about potential cases of Lyme disease, right, which are carried by black-leg ticks. So,
Right.
and there's other diseases to talk about with ticks. So, under this, and this was a time because we never had them here. So, for you, and looking at from citizen scientists, everything else you're looking at, where are we seeing these things spread? And I know I'm not going to ask you a health concern side of this. I have a statement from community, the Department of Health and Community Services on it, which I mean, it doesn't go into your research, but just a general statement on it. So where do we think these things are going?
So ticks are an important group, of course, and one of these most notorious groups that we know is responding very rapidly to climate change. So it's the empirical data that we've shown over the last number of decades show that ticks are moving, one of the fastest northward moving things out there. They're moving almost 50 kilometers northward per year. And so we were able to show that actually what we did was model, so using those climate areas across, basically climate-defined habitat across eastern Canada, we're able to show that actually by 2100, it's most likely that we will see, or very likely that we will see, the most optimal habitats, so very good climate-based areas for ticks to live in, if I can say, pretty much doubling by 2100. So about 9% of the landscape currently is what we would call climate suitable for ticks to live in, and we see that expanding to over 18%. So very high likelihood that ticks could live in those areas based on strictly on the climate.
Yeah.
And then the other big change we saw was that the least suitable, or the most unsuitable, where we're not likely to see good climates for ticks to live in, decreasing by threefold. So from over 60% unsuitable habitat across eastern Canada, declining to less than 20% of the unsuitable climate area. So again, these things are taking very good advantage of climate warming and moving rapidly northward. We could see them as high north as about 51 or 52 degrees north. Here on the island, where we range from 46 degrees north to right up to the northern peninsula, about 51 degrees north. I think.
So the whole island. Right.
Yeah. So pretty much in theory. So the thing is, I think the important thing is too, there's biological things at play there as well. So most of the ticks we get here, we know come every spring on migratory birds. We call these adventive ticks. So they take a ride on migratory birds. We do get millions of birds coming northward. With them, ticks are hitching rides and land here, and they spend here the summers here and into the fall even. And ticks can be active for up to 5 degrees Celsius, above 5 degrees Celsius, or down to 5 degrees Celsius, I should say.
Yeah. So then, with the concern of coming in on birds, and then the climate is more habitable for them, you can paint the picture there. Joe,
exactly. So
one final point for you before I got to run.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Yeah. So not surprisingly, birds are moving much north. Many species of birds, we're seeing different species of birds moving northwards as well, and so that's bringing more ticks northward as well. Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Joe Bowden there, entomologist in Corner Brook. And look, on Wednesday, when we were speaking about farming and climate change, and poultry farmer Darrell Legg mentioned on his farm in Harper, Maine, he's like, look, I've seen birds that I've never seen before. I grew up here, I've lived here, but he talks about the change of what he's been noticing. Here's a recent article from a month ago in The Guardian. Mosquitoes found in Iceland for the first time as climate crisis warms country. 3 specimens discovered in what was previously one of the few places in the world without insects. And I said I had a statement for you from the Department of Health and Community Services. It just says public health closely monitors diseases carried by insects on an ongoing basis. Tick-borne diseases are reported by public health, by healthcare providers in the Public Health Microbiology Laboratory. There have been no locally acquired human cases of Lyme disease in Newfoundland and Labrador. A few reported cases in the province were related to travel in other jurisdictions. So the more you know. This is the signal. We're going into the main part of the conversation for today. Like I promised, we are talking about food, health, and nutrition. If you want to give us your thoughts. Text us 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca. Pablo Navarro is back, Senior Research Officer at the NL Center for Applied Health Research at Memorial University. Professor Rachel Prowse is here, registered dietitian and assistant professor of nutrition and dietetics. Hey, I got it. At Memorial University. And Dr. Itai Malkin is back, Medical Officer of Health, Newfoundland and Labrador Provincial Public Health. On the line, Samantha Young, Program Coordinator with Food First NL. And Tara Ryan is also on the line, Labrador Climate Services Specialist with Climate Atlantic, our second Climate Atlantic guest of the week. Just so everyone can match names with voices, because this is radio. Tara, we'll start with you. How you doing? We'll try that again.
I'm doing good,
thanks. There you are. Excellent.
Yeah, doing well. How are you?
Good. Tell us, you're a Labrador Climate Services Specialist with Climate Atlantic. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I'm newish to the position. I just started in June. And so I'm part of a network of provincial specialists in Atlantic Canada. So, there's one in Nova Scotia, one on PEI, New Brunswick, on the island of Newfoundland, and me in Labrador. And so, essentially in a nutshell, my job is to engage communities, Indigenous governments, municipalities, provincial governments, to support them with climate change adaptation initiatives, and also, making climate data more accessible and being able to equip people with those kinds of supports to make important decisions.
So with the Labrador lens for today, if we're thinking of climate change, food, nutrition, what's on your mind?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Labrador is so unique because, it is Atlantic Canada, but there's also, that kind of subarctic and Arctic component of this region of the province. Broadly speaking, we're kind of on a path to, where we see temperature increases, and so Labrador could see a 5.5 degrees Celsius increase by the year 2100. And so that can that also kind of accompanies a lot of different things. Hotter days is kind of the most in your face one, but, that kind of also comes with increased flooding risks, permafrost thaw, ocean warming, and, the shifting in the timing of different things like fall frost, snow cover. Yeah.
All right. That's a good jumping off point for this. Yeah, I'm also, thinking about my trip to Nain at the start of this year, talking to folks about sea ice and the impacts of for getting out on the land and for country food and all of that. Yeah. Stay with us. And also, if there's something you want to say and I haven't visited back to you in a bit, just say it out loud. I'll come to you. Samantha Young is on the line too, Program Coordinator, Food First NL. Hello, Samantha. How are you?
I am not too bad. How are you doing?
That's a great phone line. Good. Tell us, so for Food First NL, give us just a little bit on you and your position and thoughts on climate change, food, and nutrition for just like an opening salvo.
Yeah, absolutely. So Food First NL, we do a lot of different things surrounding kind of the right to food for all in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that's our main focus. How I try and do that in my work is by sort of integrating a background in environmental policy and conversations around climate and those sorts of things, and integrating it into conversations around how do people get the food that they need, and some of the issues that we're going to probably be running into more and more often as the climate continues to change, both in Labrador and on the island of Newfoundland. So I'm sort of working on how do we as an organization and us as a province support changes that are going to be happening and make it so that we can all continue to eat with joy and dignity, which is, again, the goal of Food First NL. So that's a little sort of base there.
Yeah, and I love those two words, right? When we think about food, joy and dignity, and it's just so important. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said to Tara there, if you want to say something, just say it. But I will be circling back too. So, it's a choose your own adventure. So sit tight. Itai, what are your thoughts? on this public health side of, you're a medical officer of health. Like when we say climate change, food, nutrition, where does your head go?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming back.
I would love to be here, and good to see you folks. Some new faces, some new voices, and some old faces and some old voices.
Are you saying I look old?
No, you're one of the new faces. I get in trouble every time I say that. So I think talking about food insecurity in context of climate change is very important. And we have such great partners on the call right now, so I will really stick to my kind of lane of public health. We look at a population level and disease trends, but in public health, we like to focus on risk factors, even those social determinants of health that impact how someone may be vulnerable to risk factors and then develop illness. So food insecurity. And, the joy and dignity, fantastic definition. I'm now going to redefine that. I will add to that by saying if you are food insecure, it means that you cannot access food, whether physically or financially. That food is not safe to eat. It's not nutritious. Or it's not traditional, cultural, for the fit of your needs.
Yeah, is not culturally appropriate.
Not
right?
culturally appropriate. So any of those might mean that you're dealing with food insecurity. And unfortunately, in 2024, statistics showed that 30% of people in Newfoundland and 39.9% of children would be in the food insecure bracket now. And that is right now, climate change is projected to make food insecurity worse through, all the stuff you covered this week, and temperature, weather, soil composition, and which crops can survive, and importing versus local. So talking about it now is fantastic opportunity to start to build capacity on in our province, on the island in Labrador, and our partners nearby to make sure that we are more resilient to climate change and food changes, and therefore to food insecurity and the health impacts of that.
Food, it's just such. I don't think we can underscore how important it is. Like, we all have to eat, right? And so looking at our food that we grow, our food systems, where our food comes from, our supply lines, all of the accessibility of it, the affordability of it, then with this climate lens over all of everything. I mean, there's so much. This is why we have all these voices here today, and we're still just scratching the surface of, I think, the conversation. This is a good start, but there's so many more conversations we can have around it. Rachel, how you doing?
Great, thank you.
So when you're a registered dietitian, professor of nutrition and dietetics at Memorial University, if I talk about climate change and nutrition, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that's really gaining momentum in the dietetic world. We've always been involved in food system works, and dietitians really sit at the nexus between health and the environment, because that's where food sits.
Yeah.
So when we think of this, it's crossing actually all of our practice areas, right? Whether that's clinical and you have patients that are interested in what does a sustainable diet look like. And in that sense, we're trying to kind of address the consumption challenge of sustainability and climate change in terms of, can we create some consumer demand for sustainable products? You also might have it in food service, where we have hospitals or institutions that are looking at large-scale menus, big players in the food system. They have more dollars than a single consumer. What kind of foods can they offer? What kind of equipment are they using to make things more efficient? And that's starting to address like a bit of a production challenge that we see in the food system as well. So how do we make things more efficient? And then we also have dietitians in public health that are looking at food charters and food policy councils and more community work, and start to get at more of like a socio-governance challenge that we see in the food system. That's about power structures and who holds the power in our food systems, and is that perpetuating challenges with climate change and sustainability, or are we supporting people who are living with food insecurity and helping to change that environment so that they can live a better life and able to make those choices.
Thank you for that. Pablo Navarro is back, Senior Research Officer, NL Center for Applied Health Research of Memorial University. Big thank you to you because, we did a show on health and climate intersections, and Itai, I mean, you're here too, and we said let's do something else in the future. And you got back in touch, and I mean, you're you deserve a producing credit for today. So thank you very much for getting it, for thinking about this. When you got back in touch with me, and when I got back, and me and you were talking, just tell me just a bit more about what you thought for today and the discussion and why it's so important.
Thank you, Adam. It's really nice feedback. We were saying that we all have to eat.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a fundamental thing that you can lose track of how important it is. When we talk about the social determinants of health, we often don't list food as one of them because we just take it for granted that it's going to be available, like clean water. But that's looking like it's not necessarily the case. We're going to have to be careful if we want to make sure that food is always available and that it's nutritious and that it's accessible and all those things. So now we have risk. And we do a lot of work at the center where we do research to help inform decision-making at the governmental level, at the health system level, and that kind of thing. And you want to see these risks coming from a long way away.
Yeah.
Right? You want to be able to sort of see these things on the horizon. And if it is the case that food security is at risk because of climate change, and climate change is progressing, we need to start thinking about what that means at the population level, not just at the individual level, but for the whole province. So one of the things that I think about, because this is the kind of work that I do, is what's going to fill the void if natural foods, wild foods, country foods, plants and vegetables become harder to access or just not available at all. And one of the things that could fill that vacuum are processed foods. And we know from emerging research that those processed foods really aren't good for us. And there's some significant problems. So I see that as a potential issue that's coming up on the horizon that we need our decision makers to start thinking about and to start planning for.
Yeah, because we're already in this battle of trying to get folks, we are in this battle of trying to get folks away from processed food for health reasons. And even just this past week or so, there was reporting on colon cancer and possible links for ultra-processed food. So this is happening. But then if you look into the future, it's like, what happens if when supply lines get dented, when there's maybe some crop failures and this and that, and where do we turn to? It's like the stuff that's made and just sitting there and won't go bad forever, right? Which is
in Newfoundland and Labrador, supply lines are a vulnerability, and we know that. We see that whenever there's really bad weather and the ship can't cross the straits.
Yeah, no, it's like that Traveling Wilbury song, "End of the Line," I think is the name of it, which makes me think of here for some reason. There's what quote did you say earlier about the millions?
Yeah, they're not my words, but I love them, so I keep repeating them in the context of trying to follow a sustainable diet. But someone had said, we don't need a handful of people doing it perfectly, but we need millions of people doing it imperfectly. And, even as researchers, we don't have the answer always in terms of what's the perfect thing we should be doing anyways. So we need, small steps across a lot of people can make a difference in this. Of course, there's some people with power who can have a larger influence, but all of us on an everyday basis can make some choices.
Okay, so let's use that for this conversation about climate change, health, nutrition, food. I'll go back to Tara Ryan and with Climate Atlantic, Labrador Climate Services Specialist, and then we'll do the whip around again. But for that quote, what are those small steps everyone can be taking, or that's through the work you're doing that you've seen that you can illustrate in the solutions or the step forward bucket for climate change, health, and nutrition? Tara Ryan.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, I'm thinking kind of, all the way back, like it's a good first step to be aware. It kind of, I think in some ways, like Western science has led us astray sometimes and, kind of steering Indigenous peoples away from, their traditional foods and kind of pushing the agenda of like grocery store foods. And so it kind of, that sort of mindset is very difficult to break out of until, you kind of step back and think of things in a larger context in that way. And so I think that is important. And also grassroots community work is also very valuable in the sense, like community freezer programs. I've seen some communities on the coast in Labrador adopting community greenhouse programs, and those things, at the local level, are really key to promoting food sovereignty. And so, like, culturally and, in a self-determinating way, being able to control, like, what food is going where and, how it's being grown. And, there's a lot in that also when it comes to health because, healthy food, but also being able to connect with a community through, like volunteer greenhouse work and also spending time on the land and, improving access to like on the land foods and, getting people what they need in that way.
Well, that's why I love that community freezer example. We've had guests on before from the coast talking about just the importance of it, of making sure folks in the community can have access to country food throughout the year. And also, that's a food insecurity discussion as well for folks in communities, and at a time where in the north, food is just so darn expensive for what gets brought in there, and the availability of it can be, especially produce, can be scarce. So then you toss the greenhouses on top of that. Those are fantastic examples. Samantha Young, thoughts?
Absolutely. So many, as always. But yeah, I really do think that the grassroots level of community greenhouses and community freezers is something that we do need to be pushing more. But I think there is also so often this sort of push that right now everything has to be happening solely in community. And sometimes I think about the local farmers who are trying to sort of start businesses and grow food for larger regions that I think we really need to be supporting as well. Like, there are so many small to medium-sized producers who are trying to get started or have been running for decades in the province who, no matter how much they put into it, still have a hard time meeting the needs of themselves and their families. So I think that's one thing that we also need to think about in terms of being able to feed ourselves in this province is how do we support those people who have been trying for years to feed us, and we've almost been pushing them away. It can be so challenging to buy local right now, and that's something that we also try and push at Food First. We've got a couple programs in our food hubs. So we have one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, which is trying to make local food as easy as possible to get. But that's something I've been thinking a lot about in terms of the new provincial government, and it has these goals on having a new climate action plan as well as a new agricultural plan. And both of these things need to have food as a part of those conversations. And like the agricultural plan often is going to push things on export and how do we export the foods that we do grow here. But we need to make sure that they are at least here in the first place. And then in the climate plan, also fitting in how do we feed people in the terms of if something were to happen in our communities and people were unable to either get to their freezers that they have been collecting country foods in all summer and their freezer somehow disappears or burns up or something like that happens. How are we as a province and as a collective unit planning for these things in the future?
Yeah, it also makes me think. I've had conversations in the past before around food insecurity, and people have mentioned to me about like raised beds, but there's a fair bit of privilege in with a raised bed. So if you're if you're a single parent, you're expecting it's a time and money thing, and that's not always available. So then if you've got the price point of local available food that's brought down from local farmers that have been supported, and then there's access to it. It is an avenue for folks.
Exactly. Yeah. Like individually, we cannot all be expected to grow all of the food that we're going to need as a family. Yeah. That just doesn't work in today's lifestyle for most people. And being able to buy something is a really important aspect of the systems that we live in. So making sure that both farmers who are growing that food can afford to buy food as well is one aspect of it, but also making sure that it's available for people at a cost that is viable while making sure that those farmers can still support themselves.
Itai, what about yourself?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Tara and Stephanie. I think you tackled that question really well. I was trying to really break down what we can even. So I'll build on Rachel's quote, we need millions of people doing imperfectly.
Yeah.
And I will add, do the best you can given the information you have. And once we know better, do better. So you just keep working individually and as a whole. And kind of like to summarize what the folks already said, there is individual stuff and then there is higher level policy stuff. And we're looking both at mitigation for climate change, but also mitigating the impacts of food insecurity and then adapting to the changes. So if I were to break down where I think people can start looking at, I look at a farm to fork approach.
All right.
So farm is growing the food, and then you need to transport it somewhere, and then it needs to be stored somewhere. It needs to go somewhere. It might be processed. So that could be a factory that cooks food. It can be a grocery store. It can be a restaurant. And then you have the consumer end of things. So if somewhere in your life or in your network you have people along this farm to fork approach, and all of us are eaters, so I know we're all there somewhere, but in growing, transporting, it might be a good way to start thinking, what are the challenges that we're facing? What are the opportunities for the future? Do we need to think about where we buy the food for our grocery store or the restaurant? Do we need to think about what kind of crops we're growing? And there is research out there to show, to inform our choices, which crops we grow, where we buy our food from. And, supporting local is really important, so we build that capacity inside. And I have just two final public health pitches.
Yeah, I love it.
One is the co-benefit of eating a plant-rich diet is cardiovascular. You're reducing some of those trans fats you get from animal products, for example, and saturated fats to an extent. But it's also reducing your emissions, right? So eating plants more so than eating, say, meat has a lower carbon footprint. And there are some, nuances there, but that's the general statement. So you can do that and improve your health, also reduce your carbon footprint. And moving forward, you can think about local foods as opposed to exotic foods, because then you know that the travel is less. And then the other piece is that we're talking about food insecurity. So we're like, but some people cannot buy the food that we're recommending.
Yeah.
So this is when I'm going to talk about Meals on Wheels, and that is an NLHS Health Services program where people who qualify for it, so people who would be food insecure in certain age groups would qualify, can go there to get accessible, affordable, and support around food. So if you want more information on Meals on Wheels, while we all work together collectively to become an adaptable and resilient food system in Newfoundland and Labrador, you can Google it and you'll find a link through Eastern Health. It's an old website, but the contact information there is still up to date for a phone number and email. So.
Yeah, and also, transportation is also a barrier for folks to get connected with food. And then there's a bigger discussion on trying to electrify fleets and having green electricity and everything. Like if we're on the climate file of all this, we can keep. There's so much that we can keep expanding out to keep talking about. Pablo, what are your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that people can do imperfectly is engage with people in terms of cooking food and accessing food locally. You don't have to do it every time. You don't have to be a dedicated farmer's market customer,
Nope.
Come hell or high water. But if you throw a little bit of money at local producers, it really does help. And it's fun. And you get to know the people who are making the food that you're going to be eating. And then with that food, enjoy it with people. Make it a social event. I've got a kid. So that's the main person that I'm doing the cooking with, my partner and my child and me. She likes to joke, my kid likes to joke, that we're an ingredient household instead of a snack household. When her friends come over and they look in the cupboards, it's like, oh, we got to do something with this, short of eating a handful of chocolate chips, as we were joking about before. And that's a really great introduction in terms of learning about food and becoming food literate. And we can all do that to a certain degree. And if you're somebody who doesn't really do a lot of cooking, it's a nice hobby. It's actually a really great way to unplug a little bit and do something that can be social and fun and helps relieve some of the stress of these heavy topics that we're talking about. So I put my faith in dinner parties.
I love that, and I talk about it a fair bit on the show. Like, it's that connection to, if you're connected to your food more and where your food comes from, that is a climate conversation. That is an understanding conversation. It's a food security, insecurity. There's a bunch of things you can start to understand, and also maybe sometimes just appreciate the fact that something's delicious and you're making it. And it's like when I first joined years ago in the reserves in the Navy, the joy of food was there for me because it was a stressful environment. And one of the captains I sailed with was like, you need to sit down and appreciate the people around you and break bread together and appreciate that, because everything else can go away for just a few moments. So then I carved my days into what's for lunch, what's for dinner, what's for breakfast, because the rest of it I kind of didn't want to think about at the time. It was stressful.
It's a foundational component to culture, right?
Yeah.
Food is one of those things that really builds your culture. And Newfoundland and Labrador has an amazing food culture and history to draw on. And I think Jeremy Charles was really instrumental in sort of bringing that to the attention of most of the country and a lot of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as well. And so that's also a fun area to go in, which is like, let's look at how people ate 200 years ago when there wasn't a Costco that you could go to.
Yeah.
And let's see what we can do with that.
Right? Yeah. No breaded chicken nuggets back then. I tell you that much.
Dark times.
Dark times. Rachel, we started the quote with you, but I didn't ask for more from you on it. So how about we close the loop on it? What are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it overlaps with what others have already said. One thing that might be a bit new is thinking about the waste that you contribute at your household level. So half of the waste in our food system comes from the household. So there's a big opportunity for us just to think on a day-to-day basis what's happening there, is that waste goes to a landfill and then contributes to greenhouse gases.
Right, makes methane, right?
Yeah. So that's a big thing, because it doesn't require us to choose different foods. You know, it might save us money. You know, waste is costing us $1,300 per household per year. So that's something to just kind of reflect on. And then an obvious one that was already mentioned, of course, is thinking about our food choices. Just simply trying to eat a healthier diet aligned with Canada's Food Guide is going to be better for the environment. And then if you can't, you know, if you have the power, you have the money, supporting these things that my colleagues have already said about, you know, I have the money to participate in a community-supported agriculture, right? I can get a veggie box every week, and that's going to really reinforce what Samantha was saying about these smaller businesses, these local productions. Or I can go to the Avalon or the Western Food Hub and really enhance that. And that is starting to then shift the power balances. And then hopefully for those who can't necessarily, you know, they don't have the dollars to change what they're eating. If the rest of us can start to change the food system to be more sustainable, you know, they're going to hopefully benefit in the end as well.
And locally grown food, it lasts longer for us, right? Like sometimes when I buy like a cucumber from elsewhere, I come home and I may as well just put it straight into the garbage because it's already gone bad. But you know, locally grown stuff, it's like, oh, this lasts, and it's like I don't know, full of life and vigor in the fridge for so much. And like days later, I'm like, you're still there and you're not rotten. This is amazing.
Yeah, I recently got, you know, locally grown, just picked green onions or spring onions. And I feel like now I realize why they're called spring onions, because, you know, just like squeezing them, they would just spring right back in life. Like they were beautiful and incredible. If you can get locally grown fruits and vegetables in this province, it is such a joy compared to buying those strawberries at the grocery store that are moldy before you get home.
We just finished eating Swiss chard that we were growing all summer. It was great. Like so good. I cooked it with butter a little bit too much, but you know, and trying to switch to olive oil or something else. Can we talk about power and solar? Do you want to talk about that?
Power and solar.
Yeah. Because I'm just looking through my notes and just thinking of power sources, and like so we're having this conversation about food insecurity, where our food comes from. So now, if I start thinking about whether it's transportation, whether it's powering our households, you know, there is another bit along with nutrition and climate change when it comes to that. Well, actually, I'll go to Samantha first because I know you've got thoughts on transportation. So, is there anything there you want to kind of just jump out on when it comes to power or transportation and food, nutrition, climate change?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times when we're talking about the transition to a cleaner economy and things like that, we focus on just going straight to all electric and things like that. But one of the things that we can do right now without changing the infrastructure that we already use is by sharing the resources that are already going. So if there is a bus that is already going from one community to another, finding ways to utilize that for multiple purposes is something that we've been trying to figure out. Here at Food First as well is how do we use the resources and the people that are already doing these trips using the infrastructure that's available in the cars and the buses and all those vehicles, how do we turn those into something that can do even more? So it's going to be a long transition when it comes to changing the infrastructure that we are using and rather than waiting for those things to happen and waiting for the money, how do we work together in order to be more efficient? Like those efficiencies can still be created. Not that electric is bad. I still want to see those things happen, but
But it takes time. Yeah.
It takes time, and there's a lot of opportunity just in seeing the businesses that are already moving things and helping them talk to each other.
Professor Browse.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because there are some really neat examples of where you identify a strength or an asset and you just build on it for efficiency's sake. So Sioux Lookout Regional Airport in Ontario, they identified they had space on planes. We know that transporting food by plane's not the most environmentally friendly, but they were able to reduce the travel time and getting food up to Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario. So that got more fresh food available at a lower cost and at a time that was further away from its expiry date. So exactly to Samantha's point, some of these things have been done elsewhere in Canada. I think it's a really smart approach.
And Tara Ryan, on the Labrador side of things, there's ferries that but then sea ice stops them at some point during the year, and depending on the month these days with the changing situation with sea ice, and then there's planes go up. Just wondering your thoughts on transport and climate and nutrition.
Yeah. I mean, it is sort of anticipated that, as we kind of see more severe weather events, whether that's storms or, like a lack of that sea ice infrastructure, which really the sea ice is a highway for some coastal communities. It is just, so I'm from Goose Bay. I'm from Central Labrador, and I feel like that's important to preface sometimes, just because things look different, vastly different in the region, depending on where you are. And so it's just not fair to act like, that's a lived experience. But it's very worrying, and it's important to be able to equip these communities with, the resources that they need to prepare for those events where, there's a big storm and maybe it's either a truck or, the ferry can't get in, or, the freight plane can't fly. It's a very fragile system, and it needs to be more resilient, and also,
I mean,
people need to be prepared. Yeah.
Back in the winter when I was up in Nain, we ended up staying longer than anticipated because the winds were up. And I remember the last morning, just before we got it was a Sunday at the hotel, and I mean, wonderful experience with the whole community up there. But breakfast time, it was there was a whisper, by the way, don't ask for eggs. I'm like, well, why not? It's because the eggs are on the plane that is going to be taking you out, and it hasn't gotten in days, so we're all out of eggs. And I was like, oh no, I mean, fair enough. But it's one of these really interesting, points of just realization points. You're like, oh yeah, of course, because unless stuff's flying in, it's not getting it, So thank you for that. Any other thoughts on transportation or there's solar power. There's so much to think about when it comes to electrification or power and transport and climate change and nutrition of food.
It's such an important input to producing food. The energy that you need to grow it, to move it, to store it, all those things that we've been talking about. One of the things I want to draw attention to in Newfoundland and Labrador is work by the Food Producers Forum. They've done excellent outreach with greenhouses that are really designed for Newfoundland and Labrador. These are greenhouses that are built right into the bedrock. We don't have a lot of topsoil, but we do have a lot of bedrock. And that turns out to be a really good energy source for your heat. And so you can not rely on gas inputs to heat your greenhouse over the year. I think somebody was just saying that they know someone who grows bok choy in their
in Flat Rock.
In their dug-in greenhouse. And I think that there's an opportunity there for the province to really do some innovative work and start to rebuild our own local food security in terms of our ability to feed ourselves and to create jobs and to have more nutritious food because it hasn't been on a plane or a boat for 2 months in a container and all that kind of stuff. So I'm very hopeful with where greenhouses are going in this province.
Yeah, I mean, I still have flashbacks to an orange sky in Mount Pearl in the late 80s of a sprung greenhouse. Also, that was the same year we did double daylight saving time, I believe. Anyways, that's just my childhood trauma that I'm talking about earlier. We only have a couple of minutes left. So thoughts on that, Itai, or final thoughts?
Final thought on that is I think it's funny that we mentioned there is stronger winds with climate change and more sun. I'm like, well, then let's leverage that for some renewable energy. And there are wind farms. And, in Corner Brook, they use geothermal energy. And to Pablo's point, this is an opportunity to leverage all these renewable energies. And then just final thoughts on climate change and food insecurity. We know that climate change is happening. There is efforts, or there should be more, there will be more to mitigate climate change and then to mitigate impacts on food. And then we need to adapt to food. So that's kind of what we're talking about now, to adapt to food changes because of climate change. And then the context says the food insecurity is already prevalent. But I think that everything that we've mentioned today with the different partners, and there's so many more partners. Newfoundland has so many partners in this world. I have a practicum student putting that together right now, and the network is huge. So building those bridges, both figuratively and literally with transportation routes, I think we are well set to start developing some resilient food systems here.
Awesome. I'll check Samantha first and Tara, about 30 seconds each. Final thoughts for today?
Yeah, I feel like at the beginning we were talking a lot about the ways individuals can be changing the way they eat and these conversations around food. But I also think there's a really good push that we can be doing in supporting our government in making changes to the climate action plan and the agricultural plan that they want to be pushing, and making sure that food is an actionable point that they're putting in, and making sure that we have baseline information that we are making decisions off of. And that's something that we really want to see in the future as well. Like, food is a part of everything. That's sort of what we've all been talking about. And we want to make sure that food is then a part of all of those conversations as well.
Thank you so much, Samantha Young. Tara Ryan, final thoughts for you, 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, I kind of bouncing off of what Samantha was saying, I think that incorporating Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous social determinants of health in these reports and these strategies will also be really key in ensuring that they're productive and that they're also serving the people that are really needing them. And I also want to plug super quickly, if you are in Labrador, if you're listening to this and you're in Labrador and you have questions about anything climate, I want to talk to you. We're kind of looking to expand, our reach in Labrador, and I have, some team supports that can help me with that. And I would love to chat. And I think that this is just an important issue, and it's important to get these kinds of perspectives. And
Thank you, Tara. All right, we got 15 seconds left each. Final word.
Go ahead, Pablo.
Rachel Prowse, Pablo Navarro here. Yeah.
Thanks for having us. A big shout out to Food First NL. I think they've brought a lot of these topics to the fore.
Yeah, that was great. And just happy to have everyone here because that's how we're going to make progress.
Thank you all for the discussion. That is it for the show today. That is it for our third annual Climate Week, 5 days of coverage. We'll do it again next year, and the climate coverage continues in betwixt and between. On Monday, letters folks sent to former Premier Joey Smallwood. I got a full book of them and folks to talk about it. Don't miss that show either. Cheers.